Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We have yet another great show planned for you tonight. With me in the studio is the mayor of Newton, Setti Warren, currently running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Setti, thank you so much for coming on the show, taking time off the campaign trail to visit with us.
Great to be here, John. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very, very welcome. It's an honor to have you here. Let's just dive right into it. Tell me, or tell my viewers, that is, why are you running for governor?
Well, when I think about that question, there are three things that really have driven me into this race. My 9 years in the military, 1 year in Iraq, 8 years as mayor of my hometown, and my family. And incidentally, I'm here with my daughter Abigail, who's joined us viewing outside the booth here. But you know, when I think about this race, and I think about what faces the Commonwealth right now, the defining issue of our time is economic inequality. And I know from my background that I didn't get here by accident. Neither one of my parents grew up with wealth. They grew up in tough neighborhoods in New York, Harlem, and the Bronx. My dad used his GI Bill benefits. He's a Korean War veteran to purchase the home where I grew up with my two sisters and live today with my wife Tassie and my son and daughter Abigail and John with GI Bill benefits. This is a government-sponsored program and investment for people of modest means so they can make ends meet and ensure their kids can do better than they did. That's not happening in the Commonwealth today, and it's wrong. It's bad economics. And there's a moral question I'm asking everyone to ask themselves, what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? Are we going to meet that generational challenge of investing in people of modest means, people who are working hard every single day so that they can have that same opportunity? And it's been great being the mayor of Newton for the last 8 years. And my time in the military also taught me a lot, working together with people at different backgrounds. And I also had the opportunity to really look at budgets and ensure that my budgets in Newton drove outcomes for people. The same needs to be said for the state of Massachusetts. And it's just not happening at the state level. This governor is not making that happen. Mm-hmm. That's why I got into the race. There's a lot of work to do if we're going to level the playing field and ensure there's real economic opportunity here in the Commonwealth.
Well, that's certainly a great answer for why are you running. Before we get too much farther in, if my viewers are interested to find out more about your campaign, perhaps volunteer or anything along those lines, you must have a website, Facebook, Twitter, all that
SettiWarren.com.
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 Okay, all right. And then you must have a Facebook presence. In fact, I think I saw you on Twitter.
You saw me, yep, Twitter and Facebook. I was, interestingly enough, one of the things that I think is so important, quality in a governor, is really listening to people. And just recently, there have been breakdowns in the commuter rail and the Red Line. There's a young student that reached out to me after I talked about the fact that we need to have a transit system that is about people and moving people to where they need to go. A young man reached out to me, Ben Chan, 2 days ago, and he challenged me to ride the Red Line with him from Wollaston to Park Street because he wanted me to see and experience what it was really like and hear from people riding the T. So I rode the T this morning with him, and I had a chance to spend some time with him. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly was that this is a transit system that's not working for just everyday people that need to get to work, that need to get to school. Ben, the young man who I rode the T with this morning, told me he was late for final exams multiple times. There's a kid who's taken on student loans, scholarships, all the rest. These classes are important. I met a gentleman that works in the IT business, depends on the T to get to work and back. He's telling me 3 to 5 times a week the T is late, broken down, puts his job in jeopardy.
Sure.
This is wrong.
Yeah. I rode the T for a little while. I worked for a little while in Dorchester, and I had similar experiences. I remember being on the Red Line one morning, and while we were riding along, the doors opened.
Yeah.
You know, that's unsafe.
It is
It's
unsafe.
terribly unsafe.
It is unsafe.
And there were many times when, you know, I'd be standing on a platform waiting for a train. Train wasn't coming.
Right.
You know, happened frequently. And, yeah.
This comes down to what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? Are we a state? Are we a Commonwealth that's going to make investments for people who depend on public transit? I believe there should be a right to move here in the state. People depend to get to work back, school back. We've got to make sure we're investing. This governor continues to say we don't need to spend any more on public transit when we see signals, tracks, antiquated cars, not updated, and then this impacts people's lives.
Sure.
Our budgets need to reflect our values and drive outcomes for people. They're not now, and that's one of the reasons why I rode the T this morning, and I'm in this race.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your life story, because you do have a really interesting life story. You and I have met several times. You actually came to our Drinking Liberally chapter
yes, I did.
here in Milford.
I recall.
Went back in the 2012 cycle when you were running for Senate, until the other Warren got in the race.
My cousin.
Your cousin, yes.
She's doing well. She's out there.
But yeah, just to give a shout out to Drinking Liberally, we are having our 10th anniversary.
You're kidding me.
10th
years.
anniversary.
Am I invited?
Absolutely, you're invited.
Will
Of
you
course,
buy
you're
me a
invited.
beverage?
I will. I'll buy you 2.
That's on record.
That's on record. Second and fourth Wednesday every month at the
Great.
Turtle Tavern here in Milford.
Looking forward to coming back.
On the fourth Wednesday, I think it's the 27th
Great.
Of this month, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. We'll have a trivia contest with prizes and a big spread. We're going to put out a big spread of food.
Excellent.
And we're inviting lots of people. I'm shocked you didn't get an invite already.
I may
you
have.
May have.
I may have.
Perhaps Ben knows about that.
I'm sure
We'll chastise him later for not bringing it to your attention. But you do have a really, really interesting life story. So if we could talk a little bit about that, and certainly your record as mayor of Newton would be
I'd be
a
happy
great
to.
thing to talk about.
I'd be happy to. You know, first I would say, John, I think we are at a pivotal moment in our country at this very point in time. I do believe economic inequality is the issue of our time, but beyond that, there's a real question about what kind of world we're going to leave our children and our grandchildren. For me, I've spent a lifetime in public service. I had a great opportunity to grow up in a household that was committed to public service, service to others. As I had mentioned, my parents grew up in tough neighborhoods, but my parents also were involved with the civil rights movement, sat at lunch counters, movie theaters across the South before they made it up north to Newton. And both my parents were in education. And my father worked for Michael Dukakis in his first administration. I remember when I was Abigail's age, who's here tonight, I remember sitting in the back of various cars before there were state troopers driving governors around. My dad and Governor Dukakis would talk about public service, public life, and getting things done. And that really had an influence on me about how governance can work for people and make a difference in people's lives. I had a great opportunity to work for the Clinton administration for 4 years, both First Lady Hillary Clinton as well as President Clinton. At the time, I ran FEMA for New England for just under a year for the Clinton administration, worked for John Kerry for about 5 years, and had the opportunity to serve in the military. I enlisted a little bit after 9/11 because my father was a Korean War veteran and my grandfather was World War II, Battle of the Bulge. And I served a year in Iraq. And as I like to share with people, one of the times in my life that really influenced me as a human being was my deployment in Iraq. About 10 years ago this fall, I had a call from my commanding officer, and he told me I was going to go to Iraq for a year. What they do at these deployments, they give you 2 weeks of R&R. You get to come home in the middle of your deployment, and then you have to go back. And the first day I got home from my R&R, my daughter was born.
Wow.
Abigail, who's here tonight.
Wow.
Spent 2 weeks with my wife Tassie and Abigail. Then I had to go back to Iraq, and that was one of the toughest things I ever had to do.
That had to be difficult, yeah.
But you know, it did 2 things for me. One, it really made me appreciate the multiple deployments that men and women do in the armed services. I only done 1 deployment. It made me appreciate the fact that some of those service members don't come home at all. Some come home injured. But the second thing it really did for me and was really forced me to think about people who are different than I am. And I served on that based with people of different races, religions, backgrounds, ethnicities. People have different political ideology. We had no choice but to work together to get through that year.
Sure.
I came into that year with strangers, left that year with brothers and sisters. That stuck with me. And when I think about what we need to do here in the Commonwealth and reaching past political differences, divisions, no matter who you voted for in that election, it really showed me that we have to look past those differences and work together. When I came home in that year, after that year in Iraq, to raise my family in 2008, made a decision to run for mayor of the city of Newton, my hometown. At the time, Newton faced a $40 million structural deficit, no rainy day fund, 2 of the worst conditioned school buildings in the state of Massachusetts, 1 AAA bond rating that was in danger of being downgraded, and road, sidewalks, infrastructure that was falling apart, fire stations. I got to work in running in that election. A lot of smart political people told me I couldn't win. I'd never run for political office before. Knocked on 11,000 doors. Good old grassroots politics. Won that election by 469 votes. And in the last 8 years since I've been mayor, we have closed that $40 million structural deficit. Doesn't exist. Built a $20 million rainy day fund. We're building 5 new elementary schools in the next 5 years, 3 of which are already done, 1 of which is being constructed. We've got 2 AAA bond ratings. We're building roads, sidewalks, fire stations, and reinstating public safety officials. We got that done because we were open and honest and transparent about our budgets. Our budgets were based on outcomes. And I wasn't afraid to raise revenue when we needed to because I knew Newton had a strong tax base. I'm really proud of my record. Those experiences really brought me to this moment, this pivotal moment in our country's history, where I made a decision not too long ago in the spring to announce my candidacy for governor here in the Commonwealth. And the experience in Iraq, the experience as mayor, being a chief executive, getting that financial house in order, driving outcomes for people, not being afraid to make tough decisions. Certainly my background as a father of 2 children, a child of first generation and 1 generation going from poverty to the opportunity to lead my city and possibly the Commonwealth, is a story that needs to continue for everyone in the Commonwealth, no matter where they live. And it's not happening today, John. I move around the Commonwealth. This is why I made this decision. And we have this booming economy in certain sectors, life sciences, biotech, in and around greater Boston. And we have got this 4.2% unemployment rate. At the same time, you've got people that just can't make a living here. They're struggling just to hang on. They're working harder than they ever have.
Sure.
Wages aren't going up.
Massachusetts is an expensive state to live in.
It is very expensive, whether it's healthcare, education, or even transportation. We got to level the playing field. We got to make that generational investment. You know, I announced my support for single-payer healthcare, John.
Yes, yeah.
So that we can have accessible, affordable healthcare. I announced my support for free public college, lifelong, with paid apprenticeships and internships. These are the types of things we've got to do to level the playing field, make that generational investment, deal with economic inequality, which is the issue of our time, and work together, no matter who we are, no matter where we come from, no matter what our background is, to get it done.
That's awesome. One thing that you didn't touch on with your record in Newton is something near and dear to my heart. You did a solar share program that was quite successful.
I did, you know, and one of the things that I was able to do in the last 8 years on renewable energy, and I think this is really important, we cut our carbon footprint in half as a municipality since I've been mayor. At the same time, we've reduced costs for Newton. We've saved money, the taxpayers. And as you said, one of the things we did a year and a half ago, understanding that energy costs are a driver of economic inequality. You know, paying the electric bill, those prices go up and down depending on the season. Sure. We shared off our municipal property, solar power, where we had solar panels, to 900 of our low-income residents in the city of Newton, giving them a credit on their bill to reduce, modest credit to reduce their energy costs during the year. I was really proud of putting that in place. It was a model program, first of its kind. But one of the things we can do here in Massachusetts is scale programs like this up.
Sure, sure.
We've got a governor, unfortunately, that tried to kill the solar program that Governor Patrick put in place years ago that not only deals with the climate change question, but deals with people's pocketbooks. So we can deal with the environment as well as save people money at the same time.
That's what I love about solar power. I work in the solar power industry, as you know. We've
I know you
discussed
do.
that before. And one of the greatest things that I can do for my customers is to help them save some money while they're doing something good for the environment.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's just a win-win.
It is.
It's what I love about the program. I was very proud of Governor Patrick with the Green Communities Act and what he put in place. Hugely successful program.
Huge. We took advantage of it. And, you know, John, it also is a job creator. You know, I mean, it's a threefold. We can save people money, we can deal with reducing the carbon footprint, and we can create good paying jobs here in the Commonwealth.
Absolutely.
It just makes sense.
Nationwide, there's twice as many people employed by solar right now than there are in coal.
Yeah. Well, we should be ramping that up, and
Sure.
if you know, one of the things I plan to do, if I'm fortunate enough to represent the 6 million plus people here in the Commonwealth, is really focus on ramping up renewable energy, particularly solar, for just that reason. Really growing Governor Patrick's solar program. We should be doing offshore wind and investing in renewable energy technology to create jobs, bring the cost of energy down as well.
Sure. You look at a city like Fall River, right?
Yep.
Fall River is an ideal place to be building wind turbines.
Absolutely.
And shipping them out to, you know, to the Sound or out into the Atlantic Ridge. There was a study done a while ago that showed 166,000 wind turbines situated along the Atlantic coast would provide all of the power needs for all states from North Carolina to Maine, including Metro DC, New York, Boston. All the power needs, everything. I'm talking heat, transportation, everything, with room to grow for just another like 50% more.
We should be pushing hard into this. We should be doing it now.
We should be.
For the life of me, I cannot understand why Governor Baker continues to either slow down the possibility of wind, offshore wind, or kill solar here in the Commonwealth. It's wrong. It's simply wrong for the people of the state.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how you managed all those that miracle, more or less, in Newton by balancing the budget. And one thing that we discussed was essentially an honesty platform when running for re-election. Why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, two things I always point to. One is each one of the budgets that I've passed, they're a values document. We drive outcomes for people in my community. We were very transparent from day one about what we were spending, where we were spending it. We found savings where we could. We worked really closely, for example, with our 17 unions, collective bargaining agreements that we put in place at the table that saved money but also protected our workforce. We found savings in places like renewable energy, reducing the carbon footprint. I think I mentioned to you, we cut the carbon footprint in half. But we're also going to save $20 million in the next 20 years because of all the solar and renewable energy work we did.
We did the same thing here in Milford. Here in Milford, we contracted with a solar farm that was being built in Northbridge. We got about 25% of the town's power from one solar farm. One solar farm. Saving the taxpayers' money. I'm not sure exactly where it is now, but the last I talked to the town manager here, it was around $200,000 had been saved already for the taxpayers here in Milford. It's just a win-win, and I don't understand why there's not more of it.
We looked for places where we could save money that would actually enhance, and this is where outcome-based budgeting for me comes in, and zero-basing all of our budgets to make sure we're creating the right outcomes. At the end of the day, and you alluded to this, towards the end of my first term, I recognized, even though we closed the structural deficit, we're doing all the work that I just spoke to you about, we still needed additional revenue. We had failing school buildings, streets and sidewalks, hub of our fire department was falling apart, lost police jobs, public safety officials that we needed to maintain a certain quality of life in Newton. So I did something a lot of politicians don't do. I put a tax increase on the ballot in the form of an override, and I just want to say, I knew this was the right thing to do because Newton happens to be one of those communities that does have a strong tax base where you can do that. There's not a lot, every community just can't do it, so I'm not suggesting that. 3 questions I put in the ballot: schools, teachers, road sidewalks, police officers, fire station, the hub of our fire department. All 3 questions in my re-election year, March of my re-election year, passed with 54% of the vote. I won my re-election with 72% of the vote. And I always like to share that story with folks because And by the way, Newton had only passed one tax override since the inception of Prop 2.5 in 1982. Previous three attempts had gone down. So these are hard to pass. The reason why I tell you that story is because the same principles must apply on Beacon Hill. We have got to be open and honest and transparent about where we're spending money, and I've called for the governor and the speaker and the Senate president to do it, how we're spending money, what it really costs to maintain what we're doing now, and we've got to look for savings where we can. One of the things, John, I've talked about is closing tax exemptions that have nothing to do with outcomes for people in our budget, dealing with economic inequality. Got to review all those, there's 400 of them, and we can't be afraid to raise revenue at the state level.
Right.
This is why I support the Fair Share Tax Amendment, asking people making $1 million a year or more to pay a little bit more in income tax. It'll be on the ballot, same time as the governor's race, so we can reinvest that in education, infrastructure, and transportation so that we can allow for building that foundation of economic opportunity to deal with economic inequality in our state.
Well, that's what we really need is equality of opportunity
That's right.
in the state. And so let's talk a little bit about the let's talk about the Mass State budget. That we did have shortfalls recently, right? A $500 million shortfall.
That's
was
right.
it last year?
Yep. And I got to tell you, John, look, Standard & Poor's, third-party rating agency, they rate the bonds of municipalities all over the country, all over the state, and state bonds, downgraded the bond rating of the state of Massachusetts a couple of months ago for the first time in 30 years. And they cited the gimmicks and games and tricks that this governor and some of the folks on Beacon Hill are playing with this budget to keep it afloat with all these growing deficits. They also cited the fact we're not putting enough money in our rainy day fund. Because of this gimmick and tricks, just moving money around, not being open and transparent, you have some results. This past year, $500 million deficit. Governor halfway through the year cut opioid addiction funding for Barnstable County, cut transportation funding, higher ed funding, housing tax credits for affordable housing. This coming year, projected $800 million deficit. Governor Baker proposed moving 140,000 people off of Mass Health so that their health care costs would be jacked up to pay for the deficit that's coming and that's happening in the coming year. This is wrong. What we've got to do is be open and honest and transparent. As I've said, I sent a letter to the governor and the Senate president and speaker, and here's what I asked. Give the people of Massachusetts how much money it costs to actually fund what we're doing right now. Level service budget, level service. And then second, don't just give us or provide us revenue projections for this year or one time. I want to see 5 years projections. I adopted this idea from Mass Budget and Policy Center. I do it in Newton. I did it in Newton from day one to begin to get the finances straightened out. Open, honest, transparent, make sure we understand where we're spending money, how we're spending money. 5-year projections out for revenue. This year's budget projection, if we amble on from year to year, was a little rosier than what was predicted by the governor and his folks on Beacon Hill. They slashed in the middle of the year to balance the budget. Let's go out 5 years. So we project it out so everyone's accountable to what's going on, the governor and all the rest, and we can actually make real decisions. At the end of the day, I know, and I know the governor knows, why they don't, by the way, he never responded, the governor, as you might imagine.
Yes.
But I know why he did not answer me, because I know what he knows, which is this. We're not bringing in enough revenue right now to pay for what we're implementing as far as services and projects. Let's get that on the table so the people of Massachusetts can see, and then we can deal with raising revenue and driving outcomes for people.
Yep. So we talked the first time I ever met you. We talked about single-payer health care. That was my issue at the time, and I asked you a rather pointed question. And basically, I think you said to me that perhaps I should join your team.
Sounds like something I would have said.
Let's talk about your support for single-payer health care. How do you think that would work here in Massachusetts?
Sure.
And let's get the benefits out for people, because a lot of people don't really understand the benefits of single-payer health care. I'm a big advocate. I always have been, and I don't understand why we don't have that. Every other industrialized nation in the world can have single-payer health care, except us.
Yeah. Well, look, there's some great things about healthcare in state of Massachusetts. We've got great coverage, close to 97% coverage here in the state of Massachusetts.
And our governor used to run Harvard Pilgrim Health.
He sure did.
Isn't that great?
He sure did. He sure did.
Yeah. He's
talked-
part of the problem, is what it
well,
amounts to, you know.
Well, we're going to get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
But look, 97% coverage. We have great innovative healthcare here. People come from all around the world for innovative interventions, care that they have. These are all wonderful things. We want to keep them. At the same time, John, we are the second most expensive state in the entire country as far as cost. So we have a situation where, and I've visited with people around the Commonwealth, you have people making decisions between paying for a copay and going to the doctor, or paying their mortgage for the month, or rent.
Right.
You have people making decisions between paying for prescription drugs and paying for food
Yes.
for the week or for the month. This is wrong. So single payer healthcare, what do I mean when I talk about that? 4 principles here. And then I want to, by the way, Governor Baker's answer to the costs question is very simple. Let's make it more expensive for the most vulnerable people in our state
Sure, for the people who
to
can
pay
least
for
afford
healthcare,
it.
right?
Yeah.
It's right in line for the people that least, right in line with the Republicans in Congress. This is his proposal to move 140,000 people off of Mass Health, make their healthcare more expensive. That's Baker's answer. Let me tell you what my answer would be. 4 principles, single payer healthcare. Number 1, our healthcare system needs to be based on health outcomes for people, Number 2, we need to make sure our healthcare system is accessible no matter where you live in and around the state. Number 3, we have to make sure it's affordable. And 4th, we've got to make sure we have the right kind of coverage for people. It's one thing to have people having insurance, which is 97%. It's another question on whether that insurance gives people the right coverage.
If it translates to
Right?
access.
Which exactly. And so this is where we're getting a single payer. I've talked to a lot of folks in the industry that are experts, and where we can find savings if we put these 4 principles in place in the single payer system is through administrative costs and through drug costs. This is where we should be finding savings. We have a lot of money in our system. We're spending a lot of money. Let's redirect that, flip it around so that the money isn't necessarily spent on how many procedures are done, how much we spend on drugs. Let's make sure the outcomes are driving the system,
Sure.
which will in turn make the system less expensive overall if people have the right coverage.
Exactly.
And let's look for those areas where we can actually save that don't actually move people off healthcare,
Right.
like administrative and drug.
Right.
So I am under no illusion, John, that this is not going to be difficult, hard, tough. This is a tough thing to do. But here's what I do know. We have leading healthcare experts in the state, leading healthcare providers in the state, many of whom understand this, and I've talked to them, understand that the system we have in place will continue to move people away from a system that gives them the right kind of coverage and the right kind of health outcomes. We need political leadership here.
Right.
And we need to not be afraid to say the system must change and the status quo isn't working. I'm prepared to do that as governor. I certainly am as a candidate. That's why I support it 100%.
Well, yeah, we see so much chronic illness in this country,
Yep.
and a lot of that is driven by the fact that people don't have regular access to
That
care.
is exactly right.
By the time,
That is exactly
by the
right.
time a problem, if you're relying on the emergency room, for instance, for your health care, which so many people on the other side of the aisle will tell me, everybody has health care, you just go to the ER. Well, I have high blood pressure.
Yep.
If I waited until I went to the ER, my kidneys would be failing. Okay,
That's right.
That's why I'd be going to the ER.
Yep.
And what would happen to me? I'd die an early death on dialysis.
Yep.
Versus getting some medication once a month. Yep. I fill my prescriptions and I keep my blood pressure under control.
Exactly.
It's insane that people say that we should rely on the ER for our health care. That's just nuts. And that also those costs translate out to everybody else anyhow.
That's exactly right.
The ER costs have to be written off when the people who use it can't pay their bill. So everybody else that's got insurance or is paying for health care otherwise is also picking up that cost.
I always ask, this question, and you remind me of that when you tell your own story. This question I keep asking people: what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? What we just described is a system that just doesn't work. It's bad economics, but there's also a moral question involved with this. It's what kind of city, state are we presenting, are we creating for people that live here today and tomorrow? What is our obligation as citizens of the Commonwealth to ensure that these cases don't happen? We don't have people making these choices. We don't have people that don't have access to reliable coverage, and they're going to the emergency room and they're putting their lives at stake. Who are we? I mean, we started this conversation at the top of your show. This is the driving question I want to have in this election. It certainly has driven me into this campaign. That's why we're sitting here tonight.
Right. Well, you know, you look at the word Commonwealth.
That's right.
We are a Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. Only 4 states call themselves a Commonwealth.
That's right.
And Massachusetts is one of them. And just that word, it's all of us together.
That's exactly right.
All of us together have wealth.
That's right.
And we should all be able to maintain our standard of living and live good lives. It's just it's ludicrous to me some of the things that go on politically, and certainly around healthcare. Single payer healthcare is the way to go. And
Absolutely.
I'm proud of you for coming out in favor of it with a good plan.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's awesome. You're also in favor of free public college. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Look, we know, for example, a couple of things. 21% of people that enter higher education don't finish that degree. We also know, in the United States, we also know that people are being saddled with crushing debt, some of whom don't even finish the degree. So and there's a shrinking number of people that are able to attain a degree. We also know that someone needs more than just a high school education to attain the skill set they need to make ends meet in this economy. So if we know all these things, we need to update and reinvent public education here in Massachusetts. We've done that for decades, going back 100 years plus. The state of Massachusetts has always been a leader in education, required people to read and write because they knew people needed to be literate, be able to write, contribute to the economy, their community, be informed citizens. Decades later, said, well, we need to make sure folks have a high school degree. It should be a requirement for folks to do that. We're here in the 21st century. We're here in 2017. We know that the facts are folks do need some skill set beyond high school. And by the way, the traditional 4-year degree where someone can just go to school for 4 years is fading. And we also know it's mythology that somehow it's fantasy and it's outdated, that someone's able to work and go to school and not be saddled with debt at the same time. I mean, the cost of college, even at the state college level, is extraordinarily high. Governor Baker made cuts in higher ed this year. So that's why I believe part of reinventing public education is indeed putting in place free public college that's lifelong, not just 4-year time limit, with paid internships and apprenticeships, is the direction we should go in here in the Commonwealth. In addition to that, we need to have a K through 12 system that is fully funded. We have an outdated formula for K through 12. We should add enrichment after school and during the summer. And we should also have good, solid early childhood programming that's universal for people. Early childhood, early childhood here in the state of Massachusetts, $19,000 a year annually. Treat this like as a luxury item when we know 0 through 3 is the most important time for brain development.
Sure,
so
it's formative
in addition,
years.
it is. So we are working on an outdated system. It's inadequate. It's underfunded. K through 12, no early childhood, and we don't have a higher ed system that are addressing the needs of people today. So that's why I believe free public college, and in addition to the other pieces of public education, we need to reinvent. And it all comes down to this, John. Is the state of Massachusetts committed to ensuring that every single child in our state has the toolkit, has the ability to take care of themselves, take care of their families, be contributors to society, have a job where they can actually make a living? Are we committed to that investment or not? Right now, we're not. Right now, we're not. I believe we need to be if we're going to address economic inequality, if we're going to build on the strengths of the Commonwealth with all the possibilities of jobs and job growth, all the great industries. If we want to grow on that, and if we want to make sure that those jobs are created outside of Greater Boston, and we're going to make sure that we have, we're investing in human beings so that we build on our strengths, I think we're a stronger Commonwealth.
Absolutely, and that word Commonwealth always comes back. To me, it is the most important thing. I love, this is my adopted state. I grew up in Connecticut, but I love
I'm
being
glad
in
we
the
got you.
Commonwealth. You got me. I'm glad I'm here, and just being in a Commonwealth. I mean, there are 4 states, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Kentucky are all Commonwealths, and I think we should have more of those, and people really need to adopt that word and understand what it means.
I agree.
To me, it means a lot.
Me too.
You know, that together we're stronger, that together we can do anything.
I agree.
And that's what's most important. So let's talk a little bit about your plan for generational investment. I love those words because that's forward-thinking and forward-looking vision, and we need people with vision. I think that the people that are currently leading our Commonwealth don't have the vision that we need. So let's talk a little bit about generational investment.
Happy to. You know, we've hit upon education. I've talked about 2 other pieces around the Commonwealth that places where we need investment. Transportation and housing. We touched upon transportation a little bit. I believe that inadequate transportation is a driver of economic inequality. As I move around the Commonwealth, whether we're in this region, whether we're in Western Mass, whether we're in the South Shore or on the North Shore, what I'm seeing is people's inability to get to work and back, to get to home and back, to get to their kids and back. We have overcrowded highways, massive traffic. While we have a boom in certain sectors, we're not able to actually support that, nor are we able to give people the opportunity to get to where they need to go. So transportation is incredibly important. Good, sound transportation systems. I've talked a lot about East-West Rail, South Coast Rail, North-South Rail Link, extension Blue Line to Lynn, and then building really good transit authorities, regional transit authorities that get people to where they need to go. That takes real investment. That attached to a housing strategy. We know we have a shortage here in different types of housing. Every region's different. The types of housing that is needed in the greater Boston region is very different here than other regions. We need to create a real housing strategy so that people are able to put a roof over their head no matter where they are, and they're connected to good, solid public transit. And that takes real investment. The 4th thing that I've talked about a lot about is creating good paying jobs where people live. We have a lack of good paying jobs in different regions in the state. And I've talked a lot about doing 3 things. 1, how do we build and support and scale up existing small businesses, mid-sized businesses right here in this region and other parts of the state with capital, capacity, so that they can grow, and real advice and a toolkit so that they can ensure that they scale up and can continue to create good paying jobs here. Small businesses, mid-sized businesses are indeed the engine of job creation.
Sure.
In addition to people who have an idea, entrepreneurs. So we got to make sure we're investing in that in the form of micro loans, grants. We got to grow that with good solid toolkits and advice to grow capacity. Second, I feel very strongly that there's real opportunity in the renewable energy field. We talked about solar, real opportunity to grow solar, real opportunity to grow offshore wind, real opportunity to grow climate change, resilience technology and infrastructure, as well as renewable energy technology. There are companies that exist here that are trying to grow. There are other companies that would like to increase their supply chain that are in the greater Boston area. They ought to grow in all different parts of the state, here, other regions, so that we can grow good paying jobs. When I talk about generational investment, these are the areas that I am talking about so that we can level this playing field. I talked about the GI Bill that my parents had as an example of giving folks of modest means a chance to make ends meet, sure they can take care of themselves, their kids do better. These are the areas we must invest in. Healthcare, education, housing, transportation, solid job growth, growing good jobs where people live, so that we can offer this generation of people in Massachusetts the same that previous had. And we've got to step up and do that. If if we're going to meet that obligation, I think as citizens here in the Commonwealth. That's my belief. That's what the household I grew up in, and I know many other households do. We just need the right leadership in the governor's office to make it happen.
Well, I'm thinking that I'm being convinced of who the right leadership is going to be.
Hope so.
So we have about 15 minutes left. We've covered most of the stuff that we had on our outline, so let's go back to a little bit of your history in Newton. What do you think? What caused the fiscal crisis that you inherited when you ran for mayor?
You asked me that question, John. A lot of there's so many different similarities here when I think about municipal government, what's happening on the state government, what happened in Newton. Look, here's a simple answer to that. I mentioned the fact that, number one, Newton could not raise revenue. They tried to multiple times to invest in infrastructure, public safety, and education over the course of 2-3 decades. Previous mayors had made attempts. That's number one. Number two, just before I got into office, there was a real lack of transparency about where money was being spent, how money was being spent. At the time, Newton was building Newton North before I got elected. At the time, it was the most expensive high school in the state. A lot of people didn't know why that building was chosen and the cost of it. There's a lot of mistrust and why certain projects were being spent like that one and not others. And a lack of directness about what it would take, number three, to get Newton back on course. So, when I was running, and I started to run back in 2008 and 2009, I ran on a very simple, straightforward platform. And that was this. We have a choice in our community about what kind of city we want to be. Do we want to ensure that Newton lives up to its full potential? And if we do, we're going to have to make certain choices, and we're going to have to be open and transparent about them, and that starts with the budget. Putting out there what it costs to maintain what we're doing. There was an imbalance. We were spending more money than we were taking in, and we had to make some difficult decisions about how to close that gap, and then we had to make some investment with targeted tax increases. And because of that, we're able to be where we are today, where I outlined the success that we've had. Mm-hmm. When I look at what the state of Massachusetts has to do, it's
very, very similar, isn't it?
Very similar.
Yep.
The state of Massachusetts has not made investments over a couple of decades in areas that matter: investment in people, education, infrastructure, transportation. Has not made the kinds of decisions around healthcare to make sure our citizens are able to be healthy, make ends meet. Housing and transportation, as mentioned, and a plan for jobs. We have to do the same thing that I did in Newton. It's all about open, honest, direct conversations with people, putting those budgets out there. They're values documents. They should be based on outcomes. That's the approach I took in Newton. We got to do the same thing on the state level. One of the things, John, I do want to mention that we haven't covered, that's a real crisis here. That's an example of the lack of leadership by this governor. This opioid addiction crisis here in the state of Massachusetts, this is a full-blown crisis. Last week, Governor Baker did something that I thought was really cynical and terrible. He proposed a bill that would put mandatory minimums in place for nonviolent drug offenders using and sharing opioids. I know, and so the people out there know, that these types of mandatory minimums, criminal punishment for people who are nonviolent drug offenders is wrong. And also has nothing to do with stopping the scourge of opioid addiction. Sure. I mean, this is the type of lack of leadership. I believe Governor Baker did this to appease a certain political base. Mm-hmm. What we really need to do is call it what it is: an emergency.
A public health crisis.
Public health crisis, and then invest mm-hmm. in ensuring that people are getting treatment.
Sure.
We need beds. We need lifelong people that will stay with families and people who are suffering from addiction that are clinically trained to make sure that they're getting the services they need. And we need to make sure we have real lifelong care that's community-based. We are nowhere close to any of this.
Right.
It's a system. I talk to family members. I talk to, I've known people who have, friends of mine who have passed away from opioid addiction. The system is disjointed. It's inadequate. and we've got to deal with it. It is ruining families, entire communities, and it's getting worse.
Sure.
This is an example of, again, what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? Are we, a state, with our budget and resources, going to make a decision to invest in outcomes for people? My choice would be, let's make sure we make those investments to make sure that people get help, they get the care that they need. Governor Baker's choice is to criminalize.
Yeah.
And it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
I was listening to NPR this morning, and they had an interview with a young woman who, when she went away to college, she found that she got introduced to heroin. That's the way she put it.
Yep.
And she became addicted.
Yep.
And her life has been just a downward spiral ever since. She had grand plans for her college education and a career and everything else. She came out of it with, I think, a nursing assistant degree, or went through a nursing assistant program. But she had to be licensed to be a nursing assistant, okay? So now she is working as a nursing assistant, but she still has a pending felony arrest for possession. If she gets convicted, she loses her license and loses her livelihood. It's the last thing she needs.
Exactly.
She's trying her best to pull herself out of that spiral.
That's right.
And the last thing she needs is a felony arrest on her record. So you're absolutely right to continue down the path of criminalizing these people. All that does is push them back into that downward spiral.
It's the exact opposite, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
And it's wrong.
It is. It's totally wrong. It's just it's the wrong approach. So many people, you look at some of the compassionate things that have been going on. The police chief in Gloucester, with his program for helping people.
Yep.
That's what we need.
Police chief in Arlington, my police chief, who's worked on, as we've seen, spikes in ODs. I mean, there are many good, well-meaning people across the Commonwealth that want to deal with this in a sensible way, a way that gives people the care that they need. What we are lacking here in the Commonwealth is a governor that's willing to step up and say, we need to invest. We need to invest. And it means making some tough decisions and raising revenue where we have to so that we can make that investment. All we continue to hear out of the governor's office continually is, doesn't want to raise revenue, doesn't want to raise revenue. Somehow we're going to cut our way to efficiency. Those are interesting slogans, no new taxes. We've heard all these. We've seen this movie before.
We have.
Right?
Yes,
and then we've got growing real issues in our communities. And I believe that those of us in our cities and towns, and I have many folks in Newton who are doing real well, making $1 million or more. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do believe what is wrong is that we don't ask folks, this is a strength of ours, right? We have a growing, burgeoning economy, people doing well. We should ask folks that are doing well, making $1 million a year or more, to give more.
Right. To help.
Reinvest, to help. That's the American way.
It is. It's
That's the American way.
You didn't get there on your own.
That's right. That's right.
We're a community, and there
are
are people who who need help. Let's give them the help they need.
There is a role for government to play. To build on the strengths of this economy.
Yeah, well,
we can continue, and we've seen it when it works well. Governor Patrick got that. Life Sciences Initiative, invested in education, invested in new cars for the T. Now we're moving backwards. I mean, we can make it strategic investments to grow on our strengths, provide opportunities so the whole Commonwealth grows.
Right.
Everyone has an opportunity in every city and town, no matter where you are, where you come from. You want to step up. You want to be a contributor. You should have. That's the American way, John.
Absolutely,
and it's wrong if we slink back from that. It's wrong.
Absolutely. We look at tax cuts. The Republican answer to everything is tax cuts.
Yep.
When the riots were happening in Baltimore because Freddie Gray was murdered by the police. Well, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic there. When Freddie Gray died in Baltimore, there were riots going on. Rand Paul visited. Senator Rand Paul visited Baltimore, and the first words out of his mouth were, "You know what these people need? A tax cut." And I'm thinking to myself, how clueless are you? A tax cut. If we could tax cut our way to economic growth, we'd all be swimming in jobs right now.
Well,
we'd have negative unemployment.
You mentioned Governor Baker. When he was the A&S secretary back in the 90s, he went right to the old playbook. Let's create tax cuts. 1998, tax cuts were put in place here in Massachusetts, second round 2002. Somehow Baker's plan back then was for the economy to grow. Somehow magically, the T's going to get fixed. By the way, he repackaged the debt there, from the big debt, threw it over to the T. That was another gimmick and trick that he did. He's continuing to do what he did back then. He's consistent.
He's consistent, yes.
And now we're in this real situation where there's a huge deficit that continues to grow because there isn't real honesty. Governor Patrick understood that, by the way, in 2013, tried to raise revenue, and he was shot down by the legislature. But this is a moment where all these games and old slogans, no new taxes, and we're going to figure out how to cut our way to success. All this rhetoric that for decades on Beacon Hill has produced where we are today, and with Governor Baker leading the charge, we've got to say enough, and we've got to not just say what we're against, but what we're for.
Yes, absolutely.
In this next year, and we've been talking about what I'm for here in the last hour, and we've got to be clear and concise and honest and direct about how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at things like I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
There's a lot of things out there that we could be talking about.
There are, but people need to know that when they're paying their taxes, that they're getting a good value for their money.
Yep.
I look at it from a standpoint of, a typical middle-class couple, maybe, two incomes or whatever, maybe they make $75,000, maybe they make $100,000 a year, something along those lines. What do they actually pay in taxes? Worst case, $25,000, $30,000 of their money goes to taxes. But what do they get for that? Snow removal alone is almost worth the price of admission. Snow removal, police protection, fire protection, schools, roads, bridges. Paying your taxes should be patriotic. People should want to pay their taxes for the benefit that they're getting. Look at what we get.
One of the things I get, I'm glad you brought that up. As a mayor for 8 years, one of the first things I knew I had to do is show people in a transparent way where their money was being spent and how. So we created this outcome-based budgeting for our city. We zero-based our budgets. We put all of this online, very transparent. I believe that the citizens of my city, as well as the Commonwealth, need to see where their dollars are being spent, and they want to make sure they're being spent effectively. I mean, I'm a believer in effective government. We had to make a lot of reforms in Newton to make sure government worked better, whether it was tree maintenance for our city, road maintenance in our city, public safety measures we took to make sure that we were more efficient there, and then be transparent about it. I'm a big believer. Beacon Hill is not even close. When I look at these budgets that Governor Baker is putting out, you can't tell, first of all, as I said, what it takes to maintain what we're doing now, but what the outcomes of each one of these dollars, where they're being spent. We need to focus on that because we'll be more effective if we do that.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, as I said, John, I know we need new revenue to make investments. There's no question. So it's not just a case of being more efficient and effective. We need to do both. We need additional revenue in the state, but we also have to make sure we're being smart and effective and transparent with the money. Absolutely.
So we've just got a couple of minutes left. Let's go over again how people can get in touch with you. How can they get in touch with your campaign? It's SettiWarren.com.
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 Yep.
Okay, and they can find you on Facebook just by doing a search for you.
Yep. At Setti Warren on Twitter.
You're at Setti Warren on Twitter. I saw you this morning riding the T.
That's right. That's
so, and let's just one more time make your case. Why should my viewers vote for you, both in the primary and in the general?
Look, I think we're at a critical moment here in the Commonwealth. I believe that economic inequality is the issue of our time. We need a governor that's going to be open and honest and transparent about dealing with it. While the state of Massachusetts has many strengths right now, there are many people that aren't able to make ends meet and ensure their kids can do better than they did. That's why we got to have single payer here in the state. We got to do it now, John. We got to reinvent public education here in the state, including free public college, lifelong. We got to make sure we have adequate transportation systems and housing here in the state so that people can live here and move here. And we got to create good paying jobs where people live. My commitment is to be open and honest about what it's going to take to get there, and be accountable to the 6 million people plus if I'm elected governor every single day for the Commonwealth.
Well, we still have a couple of minutes left. So anything else you'd like to say to my viewers?
Here's what I would say. You know, this is going to be a tough campaign. You know, for those of us who read the headlines about approval ratings that the governor has and whatnot, two things I would say. We got to make sure we do grassroots politics, person to person, have these conversations. This is a great one about the real issues of our time. That'll help drive turnout, which wins if you're a guy like me. The second thing I would say, and I said this over and over again, we can't just say what we're against, we got to say what we're for and be honest about it and be direct about it. And I think we can do better here in our state. And I believe that certainly with my background as a mayor, as a veteran, and as someone that understands that generational commitment, I believe I offer the best chance not only to win, but for the Commonwealth to meet its full potential.
Okay. Setti, thank you so much for taking time off
Thank
the
you.
busy campaign trail.
It's great to be here.
I really appreciate you coming in. Once you're elected governor, I want you back.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'll be here a lot.
All right. So you've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good night.